emergency for the first time in about
This is Jim, and
Receiving this message. We are Ken Jennings and John Roderick. We speak to you from our present, which we can only assume is your distant past, the turbulent time that was the early 21st century.
Fearing the great cataclysm that will surely befall our civilization, we began this monumental reference of strange and obscure human knowledge. These recordings represent our attempt to compile and preserve wonders and esoterica that would otherwise be lost.
So whether you're listening from an advanced civilization or have just reinvented the technology to decrypt our transmissions, this is our legacy to you.
This is our time capsule. This is the Omnibus.
You have accessed entry 677.IS6015, certificate number 32373. Juggalos.
Are you down with the clown, Ken?
I feel like the answer is probably no if I'm not sure what the question means.
This is a little bit like Fnord. Either you hear it or you don't.
So I heard you say the word clown. Does that mean I'm actually a juggalo? Am I secretly a juggalo? Do some people here, are you down with the...
A lot of people are maybe closer to being juggalos than they think.
I'm juggalo adjacent.
Are you?
No.
No, you're not at all.
I have drunk cheap soft drinks before.
Have you actually had Faygo?
That was very loud.
Oh my God. It was some sort of spam, like your system's been infected.
Oh no, click here.
Because I was on some Juggalo website and it's got some garbage ad sales. I don't know. Have you had Faygo? Have you ever consumed Faygo?
I never have, and I don't know if I've even ever seen it. Is it regional?
It is.
It's like a store brand soda?
Faygo is a regional soda pop that is, that's sort of, I guess, it's actually headquartered in Michigan, but it's considered a kind of, I guess, a thing that's more available in the southern United States and Midwestern states. But Michigan plays a big role in our story today. You can get Faygo in Seattle at Ezel's chicken restaurants.
Wait, that's what is that what the soda fountain drinks are? They're all Faygo?
Well, they're in bottles.
Oh, okay.
But you can go to Ezel's. I'm sure you patronize Ezel's.
I go to Heaven Sent, which is Ezel's post-divorce, actually with Ezel chicken place.
Sure,
we don't need to get into the Seattle chicken schism.
There was a chicken schism here in Seattle. The owners of one chicken restaurant took the recipe, where I guess the other ones took the name. It's Oprah's favorite fried chicken. You know, she has it flown in.
Yeah, and she's got a place on like Lopez now, right? Do you think she moved closer to Ezel's?
Maybe so. She does. She has a big compound up on Lopez. I hope we're not giving anything away. Lopez is one of the islands.
Should we give away the latitude and longitude so people can annoy Oprah?
They can look it up. Detroit, Michigan is the locus of the Juggalo experience
because
that's
where the band is from,
it originated right? There. Are you a hip hop fan? I know that you are a music fan, and I know that you love hip hop. But what is the depth of your love for hip hop?
I think it does not get into anything
remotely
horrorcore. Like it really has to be like what were white college students listening to in Tribe Called Quest? Oh, perfect.
Did you pick up on NWA or was it too rough and tumble?
I feel like I was very self-congratulatory that I would listen to Public Enemy. I would listen to the tough rap that was also socially conscious.
Sure, it was very political,
yeah.
But Chuck D was an intellectual.
Yeah, so I wanted Chuck D and Q-Tip and guys like that to be my hip hop icons.
Right. You were You were a De La Soul.
Exactly. That's very damning.
Daisy Rock. Back in the 80s, with the advent of gangsta rap, which was a sort of development that happened simultaneously. I mean, Ice-T was a progenitor of gangsta rap.
But definitely the NWA guys.
But NWA really like established a new tone, which was that they were no longer sort of rapping about things that were going to appeal to a broad audience. It wasn't party rap anymore. It wasn't about feeling good.
I just wanted to listen to Kid and Play, and suddenly everything's about bank robbing and misogyny.
NWA arrived on the scene, and their MO was that they were going to talk about life on the ground, what it was really like in their experience growing up in Compton in Los Angeles. And it resonated with people because it felt very true to life. And it described violence, but it also, that the terminology was that it glorified violence, but it didn't so much as depict it in vignettes. They had stories about gang murders and doing crimes, and part of the mythology of it was that they were actually criminals themselves or forced into criminality by their circumstances. But it resonated throughout hip hop culture.
I had many, many friends that loved NWA, and I feel like it was mostly like my delighted white friends.
Yes.
I don't think they just wanted the chance to say the N-word, but I think they did. They definitely liked the taboo nature of the subject matter.
Yeah, and it was very voyeuristic. I mean, like all popular music forms, the audience was not confined just to the people who most resembled the artists, right? It became...
the inside people it was for.
Right. It became sort of universally suburban adopted. And I think it influenced a whole generation of young suburban kids to adopt maybe a little bit of a tougher swagger than they had probably earned.
I'm still wearing my X hat right now as we record this.
If you think about Tom Hanks's youngest son, Chet Hayes, but perpetually in the news, but not in any news that you would read, perpetually in internet news, for just adopting that kind of unearned hip-hop slang. He speaks in a kind of cadence that one wouldn't associate with Tom Hanks's whatever his home life was growing up, pretty stable and pretty affluent.
Except we all know from watching these, movies that Ice Cube just became a suburban dad anyway.
But he went the other direction, right? He ended up acting in lighthearted comedies. But so although gangster rap kind of had maybe more diffuse origins than just NWA, right? It was on the verge, kind of, because even rappers like Run DMC who became very mainstream, their raps were talking initially about what it was like in...
it was street life, sure.
In street life.
They didn't even have to use their AK.
Well, and they weren't especially violent as much.
That's why they didn't have to use it. They didn't own one.
But so this sort of realistic, and gangster rap is just like grunge, a thing that a term that was applied rather than one that was self-generating from the culture. But there became all these different. It sprung up in New York and in Atlanta. I mean, it resonated widely enough that it became a new genre. So much so that rappers in that early 90s period almost...
it became synonymous with rap. It was very easy to say, oh, rap, sure, that's the... It's no longer a diverse form. Now it's about crime and misogyny, which was kind of a bummer.
Well, and
unfair. But
also telling the true story of police interactions with inner city culture. Right? There was not... This was during a period in America where in popular culture, we were talking as though we were in a post-racial society. And part of the reaction to that was this sort of depiction of, no, we're not in a post-racial society if you live in Compton or if you live in inner city Detroit.
This was the soundtrack for people who had seen this Rodney King video.
Right, exactly.
And we're no longer under any illusion.
This was a pre-Black Lives Matter, but a similar kind of like, don't make any mistake that your experience in the suburbs is similar to our experience in the city.
Right.
But it did become like sonically and culturally now much less possible that you could have hip hop music that was focused on togetherness, unity. It was not there was not now a popular subgenre of
a vibey summer hip hop.
Yeah, vibey summer hip hop. And I mean, you still did have Salt and Pepper, you still did have legacy artists, but new rappers needed to be legit. And if they weren't talking about what was happening on the streets, there was a lack of legitimacy.
And they had to talk autobiographically, right?
Right.
They had to actually have the bullet wounds.
And we see a lot of what is mainstream, like big money hip hop now, came out of that school. Jay-Z, who is rap's first billionaire, his origin story is as a street drug dealer and a kid that was in the life, as we say. Now he was
not always a tycoon.
Not always a tycoon.
He didn't have the monocle at the time.
And Detroit, because Detroit has a lot of factors that play into this, right? It was a city in decline.
I thought they closed down all the factories.
They did. They closed the factories down, but that happened first in Allentown. But Detroit was a city that in some ways exemplifies urban blight. It exemplifies white flight. Detroit had a very large African American population because of a variety of factors. The factory work that
car manufacturing
that flourished in the 50s that brought a lot of people in a great migration up the Mississippi River to the north from the south, from the endemic racism of the South to the very subtle, the much more subtle racism of the North.
It's not that subtle, but I guess compared to Southern racism,
yeah,
it's
sure,
subtle.
compared to Alabama. And then, the inner city was left in this period of suburban flight, but also the inner city of Detroit was really famously sort of decimated by the construction of the interstate highway system.
Right.
So they ran the freeway right through the heart of the most vibrant, black neighborhood in Detroit, and it created a condition of where there was no longer any pretending that there wasn't just an institutional hostility to black culture that started this history of riots in Detroit and, burning the city down kind of throughout the 60s and 70s. So Detroit became a hotbed of music. And sure, we think of it as the home of Motown. And also, the MC5. Detroit
early punk.
Continued to produce music that had a social message, and music that throughout the 70s increasingly became more and more aggressive, I guess. And by the advent of this era of early 90s gangster rap, Detroit was producing a variety of kind of, maybe sub-national hip hop artists. And it was at this time that a couple of brothers by the name of Bruce, they weren't both named Bruce, that was their last name, or there was a little family, the Bruce family, that grew up in poverty in Detroit. Their father left when they were young and absconded with what little money they had, and they were raised by a single mother. The oldest brother was named Robert Bruce. Not
like in Braveheart?
Not the Braveheart Robert Bruce, but I stopped short of calling him a lesser Bruce, because we'll see, maybe futurelings are thinking Sure, Robert Bruce, the
Juggalo sibling.
the font from which all culture emanates or emanated. Robert Bruce was they were raised in, I think, what you would call fairly extreme poverty. I mean, they went to school, but they were, living on government subsidies.
Very working class white family.
I mean, their mother worked as a janitor, and she was supporting the entire family on her wage. It's very similar, I think, to Eminem's origin story, also
Which
from
is also
Detroit,
probably not far away, yeah.
and not far at all. They were white kids, the Bruce brothers. Robert and his younger brother Joseph dabbled in street gangage. They were.
What do you do? Can you be in a white street gang, or do you just have to be so down that?
You can start. I mean, I think most street gangs start in a group of friends that are all just trying to make it. You don't always necessarily just try and go submit your membership application to the Bloods or the Crips.
That's what I did.
Is that right? And it was.
I never got an email back.
No, I know, that's too bad. You probably needed to adjust what you thought your salary should be.
I thought the essay was very strong.
They had, they dabbled in all of the kind of sort of stew of street cultures of the late 80s.
Petty crime.
Yeah, petty crime.
The
and sort
drugs
of,
you'd expect.
And gradual adoption of hip hop language and signifiers. Robert eventually kind of tried to get out by joining the army, and left. They were actually living in Farmington Hills, which is a suburb of Detroit. He left for the army, and from the late 80s to the early 90s, he was there. But his brother Joe remained in Farmington Hills and started a street gang that was called he started a street gang called the Inner City Posse. Now, to those of us living here in Seattle, the idea of a bunch of white kids starting a little gang called the Inner City Posse.
Well, especially if they live out in Farmington Hills. They're in some kind of blighted white suburb, right?
Right. It seems a little unlikely. It would make you raise an eyebrow. And it did there, too.
they did not immediately have the cred as representing inner city Detroit?
No, but I think if you are in desperate poverty and living in conditions where where your life is on the streets, there are perhaps different rules about your adoption of what you hear as the language of the streets. Let's call it the language of the streets. Now, the language of your and my streets are very different, right? It's mostly the poems of Robert Frost
Right.
and the dulcet tones of Seals and Crofts.
I'm walking down to the Thai restaurant listening to yacht rock come from the nearby Mexican patio.
But they start doing some crimes. They start doing some raps. There's a little bit of professional wrestling, amateur wrestling thrown in there. It's a stew of different influences. You see Kid Rock come out of the same sort of culture where it's a little bit redneck. It was kind of a merging of a rock country, kind of a hard rock meets country ethos with, the spitting lyrics of hip hop. Right. As hip hop disseminated across the country, it was readily adopted by people who were already listening to Lynyrd Skynyrd and looking for protest music. And there's all kinds of protest music that, even though it may sound quite dissimilar, it really works together in terms of, the message of the MC5 and the message of NWA aren't remarkably different when posited against global capitalism, for instance.
It wasn't it's not a scene I remember fondly. Like it hasn't aged that well, right? There's not a whole lot of nostalgia for that whole Kid Rock, Limp Bizkit, rap rock sound.
No, that stuff is terrible. But there's a lot of, NWA really holds up. I think you could listen to it today because the music was largely created by Dr. Dre, who I think we all agree is a genius.
Yeah, I was not thinking of gangster rap. I was thinking of the rap rock fusion
like
in particular.
White kid rap rock didn't become a, let's say, I mean, we cannot predict futurelings and what they're going to love, but it hasn't produced, there has never really been a side of hip hop that was co-opted entirely by white artists and became a new style of the genre.
It's actually pretty cool that it all kind of died immediately. Like, I guess it spawned new metal first.
The new metal still exists. I mean, and there are still plenty of white rappers, but they're always, they never, it's not like rock and roll or even blues.
Where it kind of watered down and diluted into the culture, right?
And became, rock and roll is largely a white art form, right? I mean, in terms of, almost exclusively.
Right. The origins are not white, but but once it became the voice of white teens, then it couldn't be.
Right.
It couldn't be.
The Rolling Stones, you still hear a very clear reference to the black origins of rock. But by the time it got to Foreigner or
Foreigner's the end. You can't go further.
I'm not even talking about as it morphed into heavy metal or as it morphed into the 1,000 other forms. Fleetwood Mac isn't really referencing. You don't look at them and even early Fleetwood Mac, which was a blues band, and would have still made reference to their black heroes.
Could have.
By the time of mid-'70s Fleetwood Mac, Stevie Nicks wasn't saying, like, if it weren't for John Lee Hooker, I wouldn't be here talking about Rhiannon. So, and curiously, there's something about the way that rap culture evolved and solidified in whatever is the truth of the legitimate heart of it.
A certain kind of vernacular has really stayed the heart of it.
Yeah, that you can't. I mean, there will always be a Macklemore, and even Eminem.
Will there always be a Macklemore?
Well,
debatable.
There will always be a new Macklemore.
There will always be the Macklemore bobblehead I got at a Mariners game 5 years ago.
But it's not impossible. I mean, there will always be that kind of word play and rhythmic word play, and especially now you have an entire generation of white suburban teenagers that's their primary musical vernacular. So when they sit and try and come up with music themselves, they're not going to somehow devolve into Steely Dan. They're going to have rap as their primary way of thinking.
That's their language. Like, even if they're like, I really want this to be about Doctor Who, but it will absolutely be through a very 90s hip hop vernacular.
But I think that's yet to be determined, but it certainly seems to me to be maybe the course that is still revealing itself. But at this point, the Bruce brothers, they realized that gangsta rap is so prevalent that there's not a way for them to distinguish themselves on the national scene or even on the Detroit scene in their sort of nascency as rappers. They need something to set them apart and ultimately to try to set the Detroit scene apart.
You got to have a gimmick.
And gangsta isn't, they're not going to compete with NWA or with Biggie Smalls. And some of that may have to do with the fact that the quality of the raps was not as smart.
I would suspect so.
And so they happened upon...
I mean, Eminem is a sign that somebody from, 5 miles away, if they actually had the
flow,
could have made a go of it. Or you can get face paint.
Well, and what they did was they happened upon the idea of horror rap, which is that it was coming from a kind of theatrical place where they were rapping about they were rapping about violence. They were rapping about on themes that were sort of similarly emotionally similar to the experience of life in the inner city and the sort of true life storytelling of gangster rap. But it was an emotional similarity rather than a thematic one. And by rapping within the context of horror movies and the almost fantastical violence there, they felt like they could communicate. And a lot of this is retroactive theorizing around the rise of horrorcore, but that it connected with people who felt who were raised in environments of violence and felt violent impulses, that they could do it in almost a comedic style of hatchet murder, where they weren't actually claiming all to be hatchet murderers, but somehow it resonated with them emotionally.
And there's kind of a mythology in their work, right? Like in the same sense that a horror movie would have a very elaborate hierarchy of villains and monsters and demons. Like that's present in a lot of this music, right?
Well, so the two main rappers of what became the Insane Clown Posse, and they had a variety of people that were in early iterations of this group, kind of group of friends and associates that were all rapping, and they were trying to put together an act, including older brother Robert, who was rapping under the name Jumpsteady. He was an early kind of collaborator. But after a while, Robert sort of morphed into a kind of consigliere or an older brother role. And the two rappers left standing at the heart of what had formerly been the gang of inner city posse.
Yeah, it's got the same acronym.
They decided that the brand ICP was strong enough that they needed to find a new version of it. They didn't want to be a gang anymore because they were getting in trouble with the cops. And so the two guys at the center are Joseph Bruce, younger brother of Robert, who rapped under the name Violent J, and his friend Joseph Utzler, who rapped under the name Shaggy Too Dope. And I don't mean to say Shaggy Too Dope in a way that belittles them. It's easy to.
I feel like that kind of belittles itself. You don't have to do much.
But Violent J, the younger Bruce brother, is someone who has a very colorful dream life and a very colorful kind of almost. He's almost someone like a religiously inspired person that in a different context might be seen as a visionary.
He's a William Blake type.
He's someone with fantasies.
So he's got notebooks full of weird drawings and snatches of poetry,
weird sort of red dragons that he's drawing in the dark. But he had several sort of like dreams that he incorporated into the mythology of this young Insane Clown Posse. One was of what he described as the Dark Carnival, which was a dream of a kind of space, a purgatorial space, where people who were destined for hell would be judged in this purgatory by a variety of kind of demonic personages.
Is there a carnival in any meanful sense?
And
are there rides?
It is absolutely a carnival atmosphere.
Oh, that's nice.
There's juggling, there's roller coasters, there's maybe a log ride
while you're waiting for final judgment.
Well, and that feeling.
Is there like funnel cake?
It's funnel cake, but it's
dark.
Funnel spiders.
It's spooky funnel cake.
Spider funnels. But you can imagine someone who had grown up in a world where they were poor and mocked and reviled even by the street culture in Detroit, to envision like a carnival in a purgatory prior to hell as being kind of a fun, pleasurable environment, better than just going straight to hell. Why not?
It's kind of the tension of a lot of this kind of heavy metal music in that, the devil and hell are really cool and we're going to sing about them. But on the other hand, it can't be that fun to be there. We're we're probably against going to hell, but we're
Well,
doing all this bad stuff for the devil. So
should go to hell maybe, but maybe hell isn't that bad, right?
Right.
I mean, hell gets a bad story because most of what we hear about hell is from Christians who
got out. They
that's
escaped
right.
from hell.
They're using hell as an example of what you don't want, whereas it's the propaganda aspect of it. I mean, hell might be a lot more fun. They just have worse publicists.
It's just like Castro's Cuba,
Right, exactly.
Like we heard it was awful because it was everybody who could get on a raft who wanted to get out of there.
But there's no advertising there. The beaches are nice. Violent J and Shaggy Two Dope actually made a decision not to rap about Satan. They've always been they've always had a very complex and self-generated spirituality. But the Dark Carnival became part of their foundation myth. They decided to wear scary clown makeup because they had a member of their early crew who wore clown makeup as in his role as a hype man.
It's got to be wrestling influence too, right? Pro wrestling has tons of that kind of thing.
That's right. And people in the audience just love it. I mean, it's when you're on stage, Kiss, you want to try and distinguish yourself and make yourselves the focal point of the show. And clown makeup, especially big graphical clown makeup, they're only using black and white paint. And they have, it's almost like Rorschach from The Watchmen, a kind of
the blotchy,
blotches,
symmetrical things,
right?
And do they always have the same designs?
The two of them do.
Okay.
I mean, they're subtle evolution over time, but they're recognizable in their face paint.
And that's kind of a hip hop thing too. That the people singing, that everybody in the band, everybody in the group has a different personality, and their character and the kinds of things they rap about. There might even be little skits where they have interplay.
Right.
Like that's something they get from hip hop.
Right. And so they, using this combination of the dreams of Violent J, the clown makeup, the rapping about horror violence, they started to make records. And the records, I don't know, maybe this comes as a surprise to you, but they didn't sweep the nation, right? They were independent releases. They were locally famous in Detroit, or I'm sorry, maybe not even famous, but they were locally able to continue on in their their music career. They continued to grow. At a certain point in 1991, they partnered with a guy who ran a local record store and put together Psychopathic Records, which was going to be their
own little label.
Yeah, the venue for their own albums. They, in the brainstorming sessions around Psychopathic, they came up with a friend drew a picture of a sort of, it's very similar actually to the original character used by Pearl Jam to promote their 10 album. It's sort of a little stick figure with kind of dreadlocked hair that Pearl Jam used to. They made a stencil and they would spray paint it on abandoned buildings around Seattle. Right,
the stickman guy, and he's holding up his hands.
He's holding up his hands like, yeah, I'm still alive. He's got big hair. I remember in the 90s seeing that spray painted all over town.
It's kind of a Keith Haring, Basquiat kind of a thing.
I had a band at the time called Chautauqua, if that gives you a sense of how outside of this culture I was like, we should have a band called Chautauqua.
And who was your graffiti icon in Chautauqua?
So what we had was a 2-color graffito. It was an overlay, and it became a 3-color, which they were stencils that we would spray paint the base one and then the third one, or the second one and the third, to create a kind of 3-dimensional stencil that just said Chautauqua across a half circle. And I was spray painting that one night on the side of what I thought was an abandoned warehouse in downtown Seattle, right next to the Pearl Jam guy, the little stick figure, which was on a wall covered with grunge era band graffiti. This was 1991, I think. Mm. And all of a sudden a door opens right next to where I was spray painting. And I look inside, and it's a brightly lit sweatshop full of sewing machines. And this is the middle of the night. And small women, bent over sewing machines making who knows what kind of garment. And the door swings open and there's a guy there who's like, "What the hell are you doing spray painting my building?" And I ran and he chased me. He jumped in a car and chased me all over downtown Seattle. It was horrifying. And I ended up getting arrested that night for vandalism because he chased me. I was running. He went the wrong way up First Avenue, and we basically intercepted two cops who were sitting there on the sidewalk. They ran out, and the guy said he vandalized my building. We all went back to the building. I couldn't deny that I had done it. And
you were carrying all this Chautauqua merch.
Yeah, they arrested me for vandalism, and they put me in a cell. And this became a problem for me because I didn't address it in the courts. And then there was a bench warrant for me and the cost of it went up and up. But somehow I did not turn to horrorcore rap. I continued to play indie pop.
Your one night in prison, it did not turn you to the dark side?
It actually ended up being 5 separate times I went to jail over this because I didn't have any money and I continued not to pay the fine. The fine kept growing. And every time I would encounter a cop, they would arrest me and put me in jail never for the night, always for 5 hours until I could call somebody and get them to come bail me out of jail.
It seems like it's all Eddie Vedder's fault.
Well, again, like so much of my life, some of the pain is a result of Eddie Vedder and his dumb little man.
He should sing songs with better messages for you. Don't paint that building, John Roderick.
Let John Roderick go. I don't know why all of a sudden he sounds like Abe Lincoln in an animatronics.
Paul Robeson.
So through Psychopathic Records, the Juggalos began to accrue a group of fans. And part of the explanation of the phenomenon is that this music, there's a lot of music that appeals to disaffected people that feel marginalized, people that feel like really music is the only venue where they can find a sense of belonging.
What do you think it is about their particular music that attracts these kind of outsiders?
There is a kind of violence that maybe it's more widespread now, and you could theorize a lot of reasons for it, but there is an exclusion from modern society that if you're truly out of it, if you see no opportunity, no way to ever make it in the straight world, and you feel like you are not only the enemy of the police and the state, but also the enemy, not just the enemy of the rich, but of the middle class, of the lower middle class. I mean, if you are looked down upon by everyone in the culture, and you see no avenue to escape, it generates in one a kind of alienation that, and particularly if you grow up in an environment where you are the victim of repeated violence from your father, from the police, from whomever else, where do you find music that expresses your experience? I mean, it's almost such a surreal amount of trauma you could conceivably experience that no one would believe it if you told them your story, right? And only something that felt comic book would feel like it related to you. And it's, there's a lot of identification with comic book powers and the violence that's there. A kind of, we see in that last Superman movie where Superman is fighting some super dragon or something that came from outer space, and they destroy New York to the point that even if you're not counting, it would represent 1 million deaths as they wreck this city, and those deaths are considered just collateral damage of this fight between these two. It
makes Batman so mad.
Right. I mean, Batman's
and rightly so,
killing a couple of people in a Batman.
He kills people in clown makeup too. Like
True.
These ICP should hate this guy.
True. No, I think ICP likes likes Batman.
Really? Even though he beats up on people in clown makeup?
Well, because he's also in clown makeup.
Ah, that's true.
Right? So which are you? Are you the Joker or are you Batman? I think ICP does not make that much of a distinction and would just conflate the two.
It's just a mirror, man.
So part of what became Insane Clown Posse culture was that they took from anything that appealed to them. Pro wrestling, country music, rap, horror movie, iconography, superheroes,
Fago, apparently,
gangsters, anything that kind of came from this knowable scene, and in the great polyglot of America, it all worked together and started to form its own vernacular. In 1994, at a live show, as Insane Clown Posse was performing their song "The Juggler," which was
about a juggler.
A juggler who was part of the Dark Carnival. One of them, and I think it might have been Shaggy 2 Dope, sort of spontaneously, or it could have been Violent J. It's really, for me, one of them is the chubby one and one of them is the skinny one. I think Violent J is maybe the more visionary of the two. But in the course of singing the song, "The Juggler" referred to the audience as Juggalos. And the audience went, "Yeah!" And he was like, "All right, you're Juggalo." Just kept riffing as you do in jazz.
Had no idea that was going to be the moment that changed America.
And referred to the female Juggalos as Juggalettes.
Good thing the song wasn't about like the trapeze artist or the contortionist or whatever.
If it had been about spaghetti and they were the SpaghettiOs.
Cold SpaghettiOs.
So the stuff around the culture of Juggalos evolved somewhat naturally. They started to refer to themselves as the family. Robert, who was still very involved in the Insane Clown Posse, put together a sort of music festival featuring, headlining ICP, but also, bringing together a lot of different acts that felt like they were part of the same overall family. And they called it The Gathering. The first one happened in 2000 in Michigan, and it brought thousands of people to this sort of 4-day festival.
So they've built up a following.
They had at that point. And this is music that I think was easily mocked in mainstream culture. Because it drew from so many influences, and because it was so unintelligible, and because it was so violent, ridiculously violent, that and because they were in clown makeup, there are a lot of reasons. Also, neither guy really gives great interview. They're using a language that is that's knowable by their fans, but sounds maybe not super smart to people in the more mainstream culture.
But this is not a put on in any way. Like, this is all stuff that seems really cool to them.
Yeah.
They're not
exploiting a pre-existing audience as two outsiders who came from...
And there's nothing ironic about the clown makeup or the monster tropes or anything.
It all feels very real and very cool. There is a tongue-in-cheekness. There is a recognition that this will be baffling to people, and that it's not... I mean, you don't put on clown makeup and not realize that you are doing a bit, but clown makeup is also a feature in serial killer movies, or, there's always a mask or a costume that the serial killer adopts.
So there is supposed to be menace to it.
Yeah, it's absolutely meant to be menacing. It's absolutely meant to communicate your feeling of being not just an outsider, but you're not an outsider who's painting with oils in a garret. You are someone who is capable of violence and would maybe be committing violence if you hadn't found this place.
Have you always wanted to learn to play an instrument? Maybe you've even tried at some point, but gave up because you felt lessons were too expensive or that you just didn't have the time. Thankfully, there's Musician. Musician is the fun, easy, and affordable way to learn guitar, piano, bass, ukulele, and even singing. Just download the app to your desktop, tablet, or phone and start playing. Musician gives you 24/7 access to a vast catalog of video lessons from professionally trained educators, as well as thousands of exercises and songs across dozens of music genres, all tailored to your goals. And with Musician's award-winning technology that listens to you play, you'll get real-time feedback on timing and accuracy so you can actually see yourself improving as you learn. Start your extended 14-day free trial of Musician's Premium Plus package at musician.com/start. That's unlimited access to thousands of lessons, exercises, and songs on as many instruments as you want for 2 whole weeks. Just go to musician.com/start. That's YOUSICIAN.com/start.
And who are they? Are they people like the two Josephs? Is it mostly like poor white people on the fringes of society?
Well,
rural and suburban, exurban people.
As Insane Clown Posse got bigger and bigger, and their fan base expanded, there are a lot of people that you wouldn't expect who identify as Juggalos. Rich
Michelle
people.
Obama.
No, but Charlie Sheen.
Okay, that's exactly what I expected. I was really waiting to hear. It's like former UN ambassador. No, it's Charlie Sheen.
Yeah, Madeleine Albright. A lot of people started to feel a sympathy with Juggalos. I in the early days of Long Winter's touring, the first girl who ever booked an out-of-town show for us was a young lady named Stephanie, who saw that the Long Winters were going out on tour. She already had found our album, was an early adopter of our sound. And she said, look, I see that you're playing your first show in Minneapolis. You have to drive through Milwaukee, Wisconsin in order to get there. What if I booked a show for you in advance of the first show of your tour? I'll book it here in Milwaukee. I mean, she was only 20. Like she was not even able to book it at a bar. But she found a venue for our all-ages show.
She's from Milwaukee.
And she booked this show. And, of course, we had never been on tour before, and I guess we just assumed that, yeah, your fans come out of nowhere and book shows for you. I mean, we were flattered. And so we agreed, and our first ever on-tour show was in Milwaukee for this girl Stephanie and her friend Laura, who were the only two people that came. But she'd arranged a $50 honorarium or something, and she and Laura, I think, got $10 together themselves, and we stayed at her house that night. Stephanie had tattoos of the Hatchet Man, the Juggalo logo, the logo of Psychopathic Records.
He's a slasher killer type character.
Right. The Pearl Jam 10 guy, except with a hatchet. And
that's a good twist. If only Pearl Jam had thought of that.
Right.
Think how big they'd be.
This was in 2001. And I recognized the Hatchet Man as a thing, but I was not aware of Insane Clown Posse at the time. And I asked her about it, and she said that she got the tattoo ironically because there in Milwaukee,
Juggalos are huge.
Juggalos
culture is huge.
were maybe not huge, but it was a thing on the street. And she had tattoos. She got these Juggalo tattoos as a way of both mocking Juggalos, but that's a weird thing to get a tattoo about. It wasn't
right.
She hadn't modified the Juggalo logo to be something hilarious, but also she felt like it was a form of appreciation for what she saw. I mean, she was a hipster, and she saw this as being a kind of...
It's something in the culture worthy of recognition.
Right.
Or you're not going to put it on your arm.
Right. It's not a thing where... I mean, I don't think now she has a national tattoo. I worked with a guy in the early 90s who had the Monkees logo on one forearm, big, from his wrist to the crotch of his elbow, the Monkees. And then on the other side, the opposite arm, he had it in reverse. And I said, what is going on with that? And he said, do you remember the scene in Kung Fu in the opening title scene of Kung Fu where Kane takes the super hot iron pot and lifts it with his forearms and it indelibly burns two like scars into his forearms? And I was like, yes. And he said, well, it's like that, except with the monkeys.
Imagine he's lifting up the monkeys.
But he truly believed in the monkeys. He just also he had a very specific idea. You have to admire the specificity of it. That's right.
Like a lot of people would just be like, oh, I'll kind of see what 6 other people do and do the median of that.
Do the little version of the monkeys right on my shoulder.
Not that guy.
But so they began this gathering, which becomes a 4 or 5 day festival that every year takes over a certain venue. For a while, they went a different place every year, and I think partly it was that having done it one place, they weren't welcome.
Local law enforcement did not want to see them again.
At a certain point, by the sort of early mid-2000s, they'd moved outside to a place in Garrettsville, Ohio, where they could. Where the concert could go 24 hours. And so they started booking dozens of bands, ultimately like 100 or more bands that played 24 hours a day, that were a whole cross-section of rap and rock that resonated with their followers. And the gathering grew and grew, the family grew and grew until in the in the 2010s, maybe 2010, they had one of the gatherings peaked at 20,000 attendees or more.
Wow.
That's
a big festival.
It's a really big festival. Eventually they left Garrettsville, Ohio. Anywhere that they would have the gathering, the people of the town gradually turned against them. Sometimes didn't gradually turn against them. But
it was the second they burned down the Dairy Queen.
Because there was an anarchic quality. The Juggalos themselves feel very governed by a set of rules that's clear to them. And crucially, one of the defining or a set of defining qualities is that Juggalos are deeply anti-racist, anti-bigoted. Their fundamental premise is that everyone is accepted. So they try not to be exclusionary, although it's self-exclusionary by the fact that the culture is very hard to penetrate as an outsider. But if you feel drawn to it at all, which a lot of people do, you're welcomed by the Juggalos.
I assume it's the kind of thing you get into young. This appeals to largely young men, but they stick around because they feel like they've got a home and literally a family, capital F family.
Not just a family, but a cosmology.
Right.
So Robert and Joe, very early on in their lives, when they were still poor teens, one day they saw a butterfly, and they thought it was a beautiful butterfly, and they captured it in a jar. And they studied the butterfly and all of its colors, and they were sort of mesmerized by it. And their plan was the next day to release the butterfly back into the world after they'd enjoyed its company. But over the night, sealed in a jar, the butterfly died. And both Joseph and Robert were traumatized by having killed this butterfly. It was a thing that they described as feeling like they'd committed a murder. And they, at the time, swore that they would not, that they would never kill again, right? And that when they got to heaven, they would apologize. They would find that butterfly and apologize to it for killing it.
So they're explicitly non-violent slasher movies.
Super slasher, but not non-violent against butterflies.
Oh, they're never going to kill again insects.
If you are a butterfly. And in fact, every Insane Clown Posse album is, to this day, it says right on it, dedicated to the butterfly.
That's a surprisingly delicate aesthetic choice.
Well, so there's a lot of that admixed into the belief system. And a few years ago, and this was, I think you may have joined me during this, but I had a series of kind of talk events at Bumbershoot here in Seattle at the festival.
I remember.
Where I had a little bit of a budget and I invited people to come and do a kind of counterpoint discussions.
You guys did a little Q&A about stuff.
We taught. I heard from people that were from different walks of life, and then we had Q&A. And one of the panels, I brought a man from the Midwest who described himself as the world's manliest brony. He was a motorcycle mechanic and a very buff, burly guy, and he came to describe the world of values as projected into the world by the My Little Pony television show. And this was a phenomenon of a few years ago where it felt like, well, the bronies are a new voting bloc, right? The bronies may one day be responsible for us electing a brony president.
Who will be the first brony president?
My Little Pony, the television show, eventually, went the way of all television shows, and brony culture has somewhat dissipated.
It was quasi-ironic in a way that...
Oh, but not really. I mean, there were a lot of people that really were living according to the values promulgated by My Little Pony, which was to love everybody.
Sure, friendship is magic.
Friendship is magic. The other person on that panel was a Juggalo who came up from the Southwest and talked about Juggalo culture. And during the Q&A, and it was somewhat posited, like which is better, Juggalos or bronies. But during the Q&A, there was a lot of hostility from the audience toward the Juggalo representative. And a couple of people...
We're more of a brony town.
We sure are. A couple of people got up, one woman in particular, and quoted several Juggalo lyrics about, where the lyrics were, sort of indefensible violence against women. And she read these lyrics out loud and sort of said, how could you possibly defend this? Our Juggalo representative, whose nom de guerre is Matt the Dragon.
Everybody has a.
You're going to have a Juggalo name for sure. Matt the Dragon, who was in the process of making a documentary about the Juggalos. I'm not sure if it ever came out, but he was very much a member of the family. He said to the audience, the people in the group, the people who join the family, they find an outlet for this ugliness in them. And in finding that outlet, it neutralizes the ugliness. Like, rather than being in isolation, rather than feeling these hateful feelings with no place to put them, this music and this family, it attracts you through the violence, and then the family embraces you, and you end up abandoning that violence as you become a member of this like lifelong community.
I assume it's because the community is not doing any violence. This principle does not work in the U.S. prison system, for example. Like it must be core that the existing community has these very strong precepts that it seems surprisingly ethical.
It does, and it is, although to the outside world it seems the opposite. And during the mid-2010s, the FBI, no less than the FBI, declared the Juggalos a violent gang.
Oh.
And partly it was because they were traveling the world. They look like they're wearing gang colors. They function as a gang in the way that they are a family, a community. They appear to be preaching violence, and the FBI declared them a gang. Well, that certainly increases their persecution complex, but also really functions to persecute them. I mean, if they are a violent gang, the FBI isn't going to stand idly by while 20,000 of them converge on Cave-In Rock and have a crazy 24-hour music festival.
That means the FBI is probably sending in undercover FBI agents dressed as Juggalos.
Juggalos.
Like, who here in this office looks the most like a Juggalo? And then that guy's got to invent his new persona, like, Gary the Mauler or whatever. They for sure do.
In response,
I assume every Juggalo I meet is actually an
FBI agent?
government plant. Yeah.
When you meet a Juggalo, which you surely will, having heard this episode, we will. It's just like seeing Volkswagen Bugs on the freeway. Once you see one, then you start seeing them. You can tell a Juggalo. They have a very, very strong vibe, which is, in my experience at least, unmistakable.
How would you describe
and
Juggalo
indescribable?
Energy? Oh, okay. Sorry,
but
I forgot. I've apologized for asking.
There is a kind of insanity that feels like not a put on, but a sort of a feeling of they seem often joyous and unpredictable and kind of fueled by the subculture. I mean, it does. There are lots of Juggalo lyrics which are indefensibly bad, not just in terms of what they espouse, but also they're just bad. As art. Yeah, just like bad lyrics. But when you look at what the Juggalos do, they're inclusive to a fault. They accept everyone. They're early adopters of every kind of, within Juggalo culture, like there is no question of whether or not you and your identity have equity there. They are, like women are equal to men there within that culture, although equally sort of self-exploiting. The Juggalos, in response to this declaration of gang status, actually staged a march on Washington to protest their like being declared illegal. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, they scheduled this march in 2017 on the same day as Trump's Million Trump March, Million Deplorables March.
This was a coincidence. This was not in sympathy with Trump or his cause.
Complete. Just, it's probably an example of how Juggalos aren't great at scheduling things.
That famous thing about Juggalos, they don't use the calendar app.
But for a brief period during this time that the unified deplorables were all descending on Washington, Juggalos disagree politically. I'm sure there are a lot of Trump supporters that are also Juggalos and vice versa. But in general, the inclusivity of Juggalo culture is antithetical to the sort of Trump.
They're drawing from the same places in America, but these guys found a different messiah.
Yeah, they're promoting a whole different value system, and there was a lot of speculation that there would be a clash, that Juggalos and Trump supporters would meet in front of the Lincoln Memorial and have a battle royale. It didn't pan out that way, partly because not as many people as were expected attended either rally. And it's too bad, because I was watching it in real time, just super duper hoping that it would be the battle of the American flag do-rags, but it didn't pan out. The Insane Clown Posse has sold more than 6.5 million records. They have 2 platinum records and 5 gold records. They continue to be a real force in American. It's a subculture on par with subcultures that we know a lot better.
Subcultures are very popular now because, as sales of things decline, as mass culture items, as everything gets nichified, like what corporations start to cling to are the diehards,
right.
The people that will buy every Star Trek Blu-ray, the people that will buy every Disney whatever. And I assume the Juggalos are a demographic to be reckoned with.
Unfortunately, they're a demographic that doesn't buy a lot of stuff. It's extremely hard to market to them anything other than stuff that's approved by, or, like music and culture that comes out of the subculture rather than comes from outside. How do you market to people who are resolutely poor and ultimately kind of anti-capitalist and there's in most cases, there's no way for them to ever be conformist. Juggalos are body modifiers. They are, they're not I mean, once you have a face tattoo and you've split your tongue in half and pierced both sides,
A lot of barista jobs were just gone right there.
there was a famous instance where someone said like, I bet you won't cut your ear off for $20, and a guy was like, sure, cut his ear off. This happened on camera. I've seen it.
Juggalo Van Gogh.
Cut the tip of his nose off, like crazy kind of, dare culture, prank culture. But as recently as 2014, the Juggalos had to move their gathering again, and they tried to move it to Kaiser, Missouri, but the citizens of Kaiser rose up and prohibited them.
Trouble.
Here comes trouble.
Well, the trouble with the capital T and that rhymes with P, and that stands for posse.
And a guy by the name of Steve. That's all we know about
his Juggalo name?
Steve, who has been described by Violent J as a down-ass ninja.
Okay.
Steve said, I own 140 acres in the Legend Valley, and I'd like to make that open to you as...
Is this near Kaiser, Missouri, or is this... where is
I think Legend Valley is in Ohio. Let me make sure.
Yeah.
Is it Ohio?
Yes, it is. I don't know.
Legend Valley, Ohio. Steve owning this valley, 140 acres in Ohio, no matter where you are. Steve has money or comes from money, and he already identified as a Juggalo, had been to a prior gathering and said, come use my Legend Valley. It's your Shangri-La. Because the Juggalos have gone to battle for their rights against the FBI, they attracted the ACLU as fellow traveler. They've become a cause celeb for a certain segment of society that looks to the outsiders, and now that includes the omnibus.
And that concludes Juggalos. Entry 677.IS6015, certificate number 32373, in the omnibus. Now, we do not have a Juggalo-like army of...
Wait, can you
FBI
say that for
accused.
sure? Do you think the futurelings are not slowly coalescing into an army?
I like that the FBI hasn't accused them of subversion yet. But I guess there's still plenty of time,
It's you and me they're going to come after. I'm the Violent J and you're the Shaggy Two Dope, or maybe it's the other way around. Although I'm the chubby one and you're the skinny one.
We're neither of us chubby, but you're the visionary, which is the one that has all the notebooks full of dragons.
Yeah, I guess that's me,
That's
Violent
got to
J.
be you, for sure. And your name starts with J.
That's right.
And I am...
I'm not super violent, but
and I'm
you
not
are.
really shaggy, but I am too dope.
You are too dope.
We did not encourage the kind of idolatry that the Insane Clown Posse did. We don't have a dark carnival mythos of our own about the afterlife yet. We don't invite tens of thousands of people out to Central Ohio every year yet. This is all coming. This is all part of our master plan. In the meantime, in our time, people could follow us on social media at Ken Jennings, at John Roderick, and at Omnibus Project. They congregated, there was a virtual gathering of the Future Lows at the Futurelings Facebook page, and they could communicate with us directly via electronic mail, if you remember what that is, at the Omnibus Project at gmail.com. They could send us physical mail, send us all your Juggalo t-shirts to Omnibus Project. That's P.O. Box 55744. Shoreline, Washington, 98155. Speaking of outsider art, the Omnibus is now an independent enterprise, deeply suspicious of capitalism and consumerism, just like our Juggalo brethren. We rely on the goodwill and support of our listeners to make this an ongoing enterprise. If you feel moved to contribute I want you to get up. I want you to get up and go to the window. I want you to get up and go to the window and then walk.
Shout, we're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore.
No, just close the window and go back to your laptop and go to patreon.com/omnibus project. Open your browser window. I want you to get up and go to your browser window. I want you to open a new tab. And you can contribute financially to the ongoing success of the Omnibus if you have the means to do so. We appreciate and are touched by your support.
Futurelings, from our vantage point in your distant past, we have no idea whether Juggalos disappear as so many subcultures before them.
They're doing well. They're in they're in decade 2, right?
Right. Or whether or decade 3. They started in the early 90s.
Oh, wow.
Or whether Juggalos gradually subsume all of our societal institutions beneath their dark carnival, rather. It certainly isn't that far from the dark carnival of that's appearing throughout the world in terms of the administrations of many countries. But we hope and pray that, well, I'm not sure. I personally, and I think Ken joins me in hoping and praying that civilization survives outside of the umbrella of Juggalos. I mean, I hope Juggalos survive, but I hope
it's not clear. Did you just say you want only Juggalos to die in the Cataclysm? No,
I believe that Juggalos should continue on their path, but I would also like, for instance, George Plimpton to survive, and I don't think that the works of George Plimpton can survive the oxygenless environment of the Juggalo literary canon.
Well, you can have both.
Can you?
I guess. You could have two competing future states like Oceania and East Asia.
Oh, yeah, that's what I mean.
You could have Plimptonia and Juggalonia. We've always been at war with Juggalonia.
We'll have Juggalonia and we'll have Omnibonia. Let's hope that Providence allows us to be back with you soon for another entry in the Omnibus.